It's September 2006, and things had just dramatically turned downward in the French sky. Here is the forgotten story of EasyJet Flight 6074. On September the 15th, 2006, about 138 passengers, including 6 crew members, boarded the Airbus A319 in Alicante, Spain. They were headed for Bristol in the United Kingdom. Most passengers were tourists returning home from the Spanish sunshine, and the trip was scheduled to take roughly 2.5 hours. The summer travel season may seem to be ending, but things have just gotten heated up for EasyJet. The A319 was one of several new Airbus models that EasyJet had just unveiled. These cutting-edge planes would soon replace the less fuel-efficient Boeing 767s that had previously comprised the entire fleet. It was a thrilling moment for low-cost airlines and the pilots that flew for them. But it wasn't long before they discovered a hidden threat. The captain of the plane was a 42-year-old who had 9,000 hours of flying experience and 400 hours of aircraft Airbus experience. His assistant also managed 3,000 hours of flying experience and 500 hours of aircraft Airbus experience. They were both alien to the new Airbus technologies, but they flew it anyway. They will both soon be confronted by the most horrifying emergencies of their life, while perched high in the French skies. Their highly advanced jet will let them down in a way they have yet to be trained to tackle. The captain had warned the crew of certain malfunctions on the left electrical generator before takeoff, but they were oblivious to the problem. The left engine powers the generator, which generates electricity for the entire host system of the aircraft. It had to be shut off for the Bristol flight. The EasyJet 6074 had additional power sources, including the right generator and the auxiliary power unit, APU, a small engine at the aircraft's tail. Therefore, this issue would not prevent the plane from taking off at Alicante. The APU must stay running throughout the journey as a safety precaution. At around 11:25 a.m., with everything prepared and the pilots needing to be mindful of the technical difficulty and the passengers ignorant, the plane took off. The aircraft performed smoothly up to around 32,000 feet in the air. It appeared to be a normal flight from all angles. As long as everything remained in order, attendants distributed food and drinks in the cabin, while the pilot attentively watched the system. In 1 hour and 30 minutes, everything would change from perfection to imperfection as the plane flew high above the French countryside. Without prior notice, the pilots heard a loud clunk. The autopilot detached suddenly. The captain's instruments went off, and the master warning alert sounded. The first officer took over and flew the aircraft manually, using his operational instruments after the captain had turned over control. The APU had ceased working, or the right generator had failed, which in the pilot's opinion were the only 2 possible explanations for what had gone wrong. The captain scurried around the cockpit as tension gripped, attempting to evaluate the damage. Flight 6074 was shut off from the outside world when the traffic control could not be reached due to the autopilot disengagement and the radio panel becoming entirely blank. The electronic centralized aircraft monitor, ECOM, a device intended to monitor every part of the aircraft's operating system, was one of the few screens operating in the cockpit. This list included one action that could entirely restore power to the aircraft. The captain had to move the ACESS feed to a different location to generate power from a different source. There was a problem though, as another item on the list said that the association push buttons fault light should be activated. The pilot had to inform air traffic control that there was no evidence of power returning to the aircraft. He saw that the radio panel's lights were all dark, but he thought that perhaps the radio still had power, so he attempted to use the VHF-1 to send a message to the Brest air traffic control, but there was no answer. He tried the VHF-2 next, but there was still No answer. By attaching them to his radio, the captain proceeded to issue a mayday using the 121.5 MHz international emergency frequency. But he could not receive any response. Miles above the French countryside and utterly cut off from the outer world, the pilots were now alone. The situation didn't just cause anxiety for the pilots. The controller was also troubled because it turned out that the EasyJet 6074 had mysteriously vanished from his screen. He made numerous attempts to get in touch with them, but failed. The controller became increasingly concerned as he began to suspect a serious incident. He was terrified of a bombing, or worse still, a hijacking. When the airplane was last detected on radar moving northeast at 32,000 feet, the controller experienced a nightmare scenario. An American Airlines jet was edging ever closer to colliding with the missing EasyJet. In a rush, the controller contacted the American Airlines jet and asked whether they could see the EasyJet on the T-cast. No, was the response he received. The pilot's last line of defense against mid-air collision is the Traffic Collision and Avoidance System, TCAST, an onboard device. To function, T-craft had to be turned on in both aircraft. This system aids the pilots in choosing whether to climb or descend. The controller had no choice but to make the call, instructing American Airlines Flight 63 to descend at 31,000 feet as the two aircraft drew inexorably closer to one another at the speed of sound. Little stillness followed the descent of the American aircraft, and Flight 63 did not respond. After that, a voice could be heard over the radio. The American Airlines jet had seen the EasyJet plane through its windscreen. At this point, the controller could breathe with a great sigh of relief. The captain started to worry in the cockpit that the controllers would think the jet had been hijacked. If fighter jets came to intercept them, how would they be able to communicate without their radio? The crew members of the A319 had a very tense journey. While the first officer attempted the air traffic control, the captain tried out the ECOM again, but both got no response. The last item on the list was changing from the first to the second transponder system. The captain flipped the switch, igniting the display and revealing 5376. He entered the general emergency code 7700, which the controller could now see, but didn't know the exact emergency it was, as he couldn't communicate with the captain. Additionally, the controller needed clarification on the pilot's efforts to resolve the situation. Somehow, the captain knew they had to land eventually, as he knew the high-risk firefighters. Then he told the crew to inform the passengers of an emergency landing. It was the first time someone not in the cockpit was aware of the situation. The captain debated whether to change the landing's location to somewhere closer or continue straight to Bristol. The possibility of having their plane shut down if they landed somewhere other than where they were going caused him to send them to Bristol. On arriving, the London controllers were monitoring it as it approached Bristol. They swiftly alerted the Bristol Air Control that a plane was flying without radio and heading for England's south coast. The landing took far longer than it should have if Bristol were their ultimate destination. The Bristol controllers immediately declared a full emergency, got ambulances and fire brigades, and prepared for the worst. Back in the cockpit, the crew struggled to get the flaps out for an easy landing. But eventually, they were successful. Because the landing gear had yet to be removed, more problems arose. The captain lowered the landing gear lever, but to no avail were the gears out. The crew knew that landing with the engine would result in a fireball, so they used the manual gravity gear extension system, which the A319 was equipped with, to allow the gear to extend independently. The A319 was ready for a safe landing when this was accomplished. Many have questioned what might have gone wrong on one of EasyJet's newest additions, and why the crew hesitated to address the left generator problem before takeoff. Well, it's still a mystery, at least for now.